Hey, what's up guys? In this video, I'm going to be looking at the Roland TB-303 plugin. This is a official emulation of the TB-303, and the history of this piece of equipment is really fascinating. And you may not know this, but the history of it and its popularity oscillates, every couple of years. And, Roland might be, a couple years too late because it's fallen out of fashion again. But it's something that's interesting to me, and it has a sound, even though it's hard to recreate it. And I'll get into that. So this is the Roland TB-303. It is a pretty decent emulation. This is a 303 emulation from the D16 group, and in my opinion, this is probably the definitive emulation of it. And it just has, more bells and whistles and stuff like that, and mods that, are to the front of the panel. So, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later, but let's just check this out. This is actually super fun. The history of this thing is that it was released in 1981, early 80s, and it was a commercial failure. It was meant to accompany bands and replace the bass player. And that's why, transistor bass, TB, transistor bass, right? And people didn't like it, and it flopped, and then they stopped making them. Okay, so these started to show up in, flea markets and pawn shops and stuff like that. And producers from the 90s started using them and incorporating them in their, DJ sets. And then they were in tracks and and then, got all that sort of fun stuff. And in the late 90s, this is really interesting to me. This is a magazine from 1998. Future Music, issue number 73, right? So you can look at that. And Josh Wink is on the cover with his dreadlocks, which is pretty neat. And there's a letter to the editor. And it's really telling about the sentiment about this thing in this slice of time. So here's the letter. Following a year during which anti-303 sentiments were highly fashionable, judging by your readers' letters and Andy Jones, the previous editor, it's refreshing to see that some people simply don't give a damn about fashion. According to Hard Floor, profiled in Future Music number 71, the TB baseline craze is diminishing. And their comment on this state of affairs, quote, "It's a good opportunity for us to buy more. What legends! Their don't care attitude commands more respect than I can express in words. Great Meg, guys, keep on truckin'." That's from Carl Gibbons from Melbourne, Australia. And, people got too popular. People didn't like it. And then, when was it? Yeah, I guess, 11 years after that, it became popular again. And they were like, you got to reissue this thing, Roland. And they're like, eh. And then they kind of did, but they can't. I sat across from the guy, I guess he's the Canadian director of operations for Roland and boss. And he said that we will never in a million years do that because each one is different, and the parts don't exist anymore, and we can't. And they did that touch thing. I forget what that was called, but now they have a VST just for fun, a monophonic TB-303 bassline synth with patterns and stuff like that. I guess it's a couple years too late, but whatever. So this is the 303 in modern times, 2019. However long after that freaking letter, almost 22 years after that letter. And people still like it, and I still like it. I still like the 303. I still like that squelchy sound, and I like to examine things. and I like to talk about stuff. And good thing I have a YouTube channel so I can talk about this. So this is the Roland TB-303, and I have a MIDI sequence being fed into it. It did not support MIDI. You had to actually modify it back in the day to have MIDI in. We'll get into that. There were several other modifications that people added to this thing to add to it to make it more squelchy, for example. Getting ahead of myself. But yeah, this is the 303. And right now, everything is kind of set to down, and we are on a saw wave. So there is a saw wave, ramp down, and a square wave. Those are the only two things that you got. And again, this was meant to replace a bass player if you couldn't find one. And, you know, imagine not being able to find a bass player. Anyway, it was meant to replace or, you know, accompany you if you wanted to play along, you wanted a bass player to be with you. So you would have the striking of the string, and then it would ring out the actual, you know, string note, and you know, you do bends and stuff like that. And this does all that, but it does it in a transistor based way, I guess. But let's give it a play. And it's easy to overload this. We're going to be doing that right quick, but I just want to kind of go through and give you an example of what's going on here. So right now everything is down. Let's do an accent. So an accent is a brief burst of volume at the beginning, right? So right now it's completely flat. And every new note, if I increase the accent, it'll, you know, the transient will burst up, right? So that's adding to the 303 sound. It's nowadays it's called a spike, right? Because you don't actually do it in the envelope, you do it in a separate thing, just because we have the CPU power and the flexible envelopes. You just kind of boost it. So this offers you some interesting opportunities, because let's just open up the frequency here. Right, you have a decay of the 303 there. If I had that down, right. So let me get on my trusty pen of doom here. Famous last words. So let's say, you know, it's just you have a note and it's just on and then off, right? That's your note. And without any of the accent or anything like that, this note is just kind of flat. With the accent, it adds an envelope spike right to the beginning, but then it comes back down like pretty quickly. And that is significant for reasons that we'll get into, right? And I just wanted to kind of do that. I should use my shortcuts. Anyway, so there's that. So we have this accent here. It's going up. Right, and is giving it more character. From here, we have the ability to, there was an envelope, but it was only attached to the cutoff frequency, and this will affect the cutoff frequency. It's not completely obvious, and it's only obvious when we boost the resonance. But let's take a step back here. What made the sound is when it was driven through something. And the original didn't have any drive or overdrive or anything kind of attached to it. It didn't have delay either. It just output a dry signal, kind of like what we're hearing. If they run it through a mixing desk that, you know, would distort and whatever, it would add color and stuff like that. So, or a guitar pedal, or, you know, the list goes on of things you could have run this through in the 90s, or like a synth as an effects processor. You can increase the depth here for this overdrive. Right? So this overdrive kind of boosts the volume to the point where it starts to saturate. And then once that point starts to saturate, then that part is distorted. So if you kind of remember, we had, you know, let's say right now we have, that's our like spike of our 303 thing, because the accent, right? The saturation threshold would be around here, right? So that would kind of cut off that and add some really cool harmonics, because you notice that it starts to get flat Because essentially when we're increasing the depth, we're moving this up, essentially, the the sound in question. I hope that makes sense. So what that will do is it will, that accent will be distorted and the rest will be untouched. Right? So I will. Right. And it only becomes obvious when we increase the resonance here. And the resonance is, tied to the cutoff frequency, and it can get pretty gnarly. So check this out. Right. So that accent, we can bump that accent up. Right. You can increase the depth, which is then squishing down on that note, or that sound rather. Right, we can bring the accent down, and it's not as effective. We can have the accent down to there and just smush it for a different sound. This thing was very flexible back in the day. I would have loved to have one and use them, and be involved in that, the pioneering work of the use of this thing. But yeah. And that's just basic, sound design, sound coloration. All right, let's mush that down and let's just see what goes on when we go beyond and squelch this thing. And this is where we get the acid. Hopefully that's not too loud. So now we're in acid territory where everything is just being affected, accent or not, right, to the point of obnoxiousness. We can, of course, add an accent, which adds more upper harmonics, which are then accentuated by the resonance, and it's just a runaway effect. This can get really gnarly, especially with the modifications people were doing. Right, and remember when I said that the envelope mod was not as obvious when the resonance was down? If we increase this envelope mod, oh, that decay doesn't do anything, sorry. Right, we can get some really crazy stuff there. Right, and different flavors of distortion will yield a different result. Right, and some take well to accent, some don't. Right, things like that. And then there's metal. Right, different things like that. I'll just stick with the overdrive. Right, and then we can get some, simple delay just to give it a bit of movement. Right. So from here, we've just been working with the square wave, and the square wave has a different kind of series of harmonics within it. So if we change it to a square wave, right, it sounds kind of, I guess, I want to use the word hollow. Right, so you get a different kind of flavor there. So I just want to kind of demonstrate what's going on here. So the filter, right? I guess you'd say, the cutoff frequency and the resonance are, I guess, an important part of what the TB-303 sound is. And people did open these up and they did modify them and wanted like median and stuff like that. And depending on the cutoff frequency and the resonance, normal filter is like that. That's the cutoff point, and that's the gentle kind of filter. When you boost the resonance, it's kind of like that, right? And then that's the cutoff point, and that's what it did, and it would pinch it. And that would kind of go up high, and then that would be fed into the distortion. Remember, the distortion kind of is right there, adding even more harmonics, and that's how you got that sound. And then it would sweep down with the envelope here, and that's all well and good, but people wanted it to be a little more squelchy, so they would open it up, and there was a trim pot. And there's actually a couple pictures of trim pots here. This is something that I found on Flickr. And yeah, where are the trim pots? Well, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. And you know, as far as I know, I'm not a historian. People would actually desolder these and then wire in a potentiometer and then drill it into the top of the panel, so they could tweak these and calibrate things as you went. And you know, if you kind of look at it here, I believe this is the sound, and no, is the I think I'm not sure. I didn't actually bother to. This is tune. I can't read it. That's the tune pot. And I think, yeah, there's a calibration for the filter. One of these is. So yeah, they would actually like desolder and then strap a potentiometer in there, and then they would, you know, do something, you know, called trimming. And they actually brought these knobs to the front of the panel here, so you could tune it, master tune and stuff like that. But this VCF trim is actually pretty cool. Check this out. All right, so let's boost the resonance to max, and then we'll increase the trim. Yeah, I'm not really sure what those do. You can tune it. Right. And these weren't calibrated very well in the factory, so that's why every 303 is different. And the pieces don't exist anymore, because, you know, you have to deal with them, you know, having a little bit more quality. And that's essentially it in a nutshell. And, you know, what makes it different from this guy right here? Well, I mean, different flavors of distortion, but there's some things that are a little bit useful here. So that's on. Let's give it some distortion. And we'll do saw. Right, sounds pretty good. I assure you that's the one from D16 group. What happens is there's the envelope mod. You know, kind of. There's an envelope mod there, but there's also the attack, right? The other one doesn't have necessarily an attack you can adjust. Right, so there's some cool stuff in there. Right, where's the accent? Right, so you have direct control over that accent. You have that envelope accent and the decay. Right, and you know, there's a bunch of other kind of bells and whistles here with the sequencer, kind of an updated version, and there's no delay, but you know, whatever. I've always enjoyed the distortion section here. Oh, that's loud. Right, just as an example. What you can do in D16 is you can emulate the drift of the oscillators, and you know, you have the accent velocity level, which is, you know, attached to your MIDI keyboard, but then you also have tuning, which will, you know, could be accurate or vintage. Vintage is kind of, I guess, you know, it gives it drift, and then battery low, because the voltage is lower, you're getting a little bit of droop in there. Right, so you can get a neat sound that way. Right, and then you have control over slide time and stuff like that. So yeah, it's, you know, a couple years too late, but it's a good good kind of situation. I do enjoy it. I think it's you know, I'm not gonna complain. I do think it sounds pretty neat. And yeah, it's all about that 303. So there's that. So I hope you guys enjoyed that somewhat of a long rambling. But yeah, again, hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one.